Have you ever felt that primal chill when something just doesn't feel right? That ancient warning system buried deep in your DNA, screaming danger when everything appears normal? On September 18th, 2021, in the remote Bulga Forest of New South Wales, Australia, a woman named Dee Annear should have trusted that feeling. Instead, she found herself trapped in what she and her partner called their witch's hut, a logger's cabin that would become her tomb. Rohen James Hanson, 42, was methodical in his violence that night. He claimed self-defense, but the evidence would tell a different story entirely. Here's the haunting question: why does intuition save some people but abandon others when they need it most? Sometimes the person we trust most is the one our gut fears the most. Dee Annear was 34 years old when her life was cut short. She lived in Wingham, a small town west of Terry on Australia's mid-north coast. This wasn't some random act of violence in a dark alley. This was intimate partner homicide, the most common way women die violently worldwide. Dee had been in a relationship with Rohen James Hanson for some time. They shared a home, camping trips, and what appeared to be a normal life together. But behind closed doors, their relationship was marred by something much darker. Domestic violence and alcohol abuse had become the toxic foundation of their bond. Dee's mother, Carolyn Butt, would later testify about what she witnessed. She once saw Hanson punching her daughter's head while visiting their home during a previous camping trip, but witnessed Hanson headbutt Dee. These weren't isolated incidents, they were patterned. A neighbor painted an even more disturbing picture for the court. They described seeing the couple drunk and arguing at their house. Hanson allegedly pushed Dee into a table during this altercation, and he stomped on her head and punched her face. Have you ever ignored your gut because you trusted someone too much? How many warning signs are dismissed every day in homes just like theirs? The red flags weren't subtle, they were blazing. Yet Dee stayed, trapped in a cycle that would ultimately kill her. The relationship between Dee and Rohen was a textbook case of escalating domestic violence. Alcohol wasn't just a social lubricant. It was gasoline on an already dangerous fire. Court testimony revealed a pattern of physical abuse that had been building for months. Each incident was more severe than the last, more calculated, more controlling. Hanson's violence wasn't random outbursts of anger. It was systematic intimidation designed to maintain power and control. The couple's drinking amplified every conflict. What might have been arguments became physical assaults. Friends and family watched helplessly as Dee became increasingly isolated. The man who claimed to love her was systematically destroying her sense of safety. Dee's mental state began to shift under the constant threat. From confident woman to someone constantly walking on eggshells. What would it take for a person to become afraid in their own home? The answer was living with Rohen James Hanson. The violence was escalating, but Dee had nowhere to turn. In small communities like Wingham, leaving an abusive relationship isn't always simple. September 17th, 2021 started like any other day for the couple. They decided to go camping at their remote cabin in Bulga Forest. This wasn't their first trip to what they called the witch's hut. The isolated logger's cabin had become their regular retreat from civilization. But isolation works both ways. It can be peaceful or terrifying. For Dee Annear, it would become the latter. The couple had been drinking, which was becoming their norm. Alcohol and Rohen's violent tendencies were a deadly combination. Something happened that night that pushed Hanson over the edge. The exact trigger remains known only to him and his victim. What we know is that around midnight, violence erupted in that remote cabin. Dee Annear would never see another sunrise. The investigation would later reveal that this wasn't a spontaneous fight. The injuries Dee sustained suggested a prolonged, brutal assault. Hanson's story would change multiple times over the coming days. Each version was more desperate than the last. Detective's angle. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a blueprint for murder disguised as domestic violence. At approximately 12 a.m. on September 18th, 2021, Dee Annear died. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, a clinical term for unimaginable violence. The autopsy revealed the true horror of what happened in that cabin. Dee sustained fractures to her skull, rib, nose, and jaw. Her lungs were lacerated from the force of the blows. She also suffered a strangulation injury, indicating Hanson used multiple methods to kill her. This wasn't a single moment of rage. This was sustained, deliberate violence that went on for some time. Dee's body was found outside the logger's cabin. The crime scene suggested she had tried to escape her attacker. There were no signs of robbery or external threats. No broken locks, no evidence of strangers in the area. The person who killed Dee Annear knew exactly where to find her. He had brought her there himself. Hanson's immediate response was to construct an elaborate lie. He told emergency operators that Dee had died in a car crash. But the forensic evidence didn't support his story. The injuries were inconsistent with a vehicle accident. Who had access to the remote cabin? Who had motive to kill Dee Annear? The answer to both questions was the same man, Rohen James Hanson. The investigation into Dee's death began with Hanson's own lies. His story about a car crash immediately raised red flags with investigators. Physical evidence at the scene contradicted his account. There was no damaged vehicle, no crash site, no supporting evidence. Hanson's second story was equally problematic. He claimed Dee had attacked him with a beer bottle after he crashed their car alone. According to his version, he tackled her into a wall in self-defense. But the forensic evidence told a different story entirely. The pattern of injuries on Dee's body was inconsistent with a single impact. The multiple fractures suggested repeated, deliberate blows. The strangulation injury was particularly damning. It indicated Hanson had used his hands to cut off Dee's air supply. Blood spatter analysis revealed the true nature of the violence. This wasn't self-defense, it was sustained assault. Digital evidence showed no calls for help from the cabin. No attempts to contact emergency services during the alleged attack. The timeline didn't support Hanson's claims. Every piece of evidence pointed to premeditated murder. Would someone just snap and create this level of violence? Or does it sound like a plan executed with deadly precision? Investigators had their answer. The evidence trail led directly to one person, Rohen James Hanson. Rohen James Hanson's trial began in Newcastle Supreme Court. The prosecution rejected his attempt to plead guilty to manslaughter. They were seeking a murder conviction, and the evidence supported it. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was calculated domestic violence. The prosecution strategy was straightforward: show the jury the truth. They presented the forensic evidence, the witness testimony, and Hanson's changing stories. The defense tried to paint Hanson as a victim of abuse. They claimed he acted in self-defense after Dee attacked him. But the physical evidence contradicted this narrative. Dee's injuries were too severe, too numerous, too deliberate. The jury heard from Dee's mother about the pattern of abuse. They learned about the previous incidents of violence. Expert witnesses explained the forensic evidence, the blood spatter, the injury patterns, the timeline of death. Hanson's testimony was his last chance to convince the jury, but his words couldn't overcome the physical evidence. The defense's claims of self-defense crumbled under scrutiny. The jury could see through the lies to the brutal truth. This wasn't about a man defending himself. This was about a domestic abuser who finally killed his victim. After deliberating for over a day, the jury reached their verdict. On July 16, 2025, they unanimously found Rohen James Hanson guilty of murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring Dee Annear back. Hanson showed no emotion as his fate was sealed. He would return to court on September 5th for sentencing. The prosecution had successfully proven their case. Murder, not manslaughter, the full weight of the law. Dee's family finally had the justice they deserved. But the victory was bittersweet after losing their daughter. The judge thanked the jury for their careful attention. They had seen through Hanson's lies to find the truth. This case had required a second trial after the first jury couldn't reach a verdict. Sometimes justice requires persistence. The psychological toll on everyone involved was immense. Domestic violence cases leave scars that never fully heal. Is justice ever enough when a life is lost to intimate partner violence? What drives someone to kill the person they once claimed to love? In remote places like the Bulga Forest, isolation can be deadly. When domestic violence escalates, there's nowhere to run. The witch's hut wasn't cursed by supernatural forces. It was made deadly by one man's capacity for violence. Rohen James Hanson's conviction sends a clear message. Domestic violence that ends in murder will be prosecuted to the fullest extent. But conviction can't prevent the next tragedy. Only awareness and intervention can save lives. Watch for the warning signs in your own community. Notice who might be living in fear behind closed doors. Domestic violence thrives in silence and isolation. Speaking up can literally save someone's life. The most dangerous weapon isn't always a gun or a knife. Sometimes it's the person who claims to love you most. In true crime, we often ask why victims don't just leave. But the real question is, why don't we make it safer for them to stay or go? Remember Dee Annear, not just as a victim, but as a person who deserved better. Her death must serve as a warning to us all. Trust your gut. Speak up. Get help. Your life might depend on it. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to local authorities or domestic violence support services immediately.